part 3 of a quick overview of TPE 3.0 on iOS. Today we're going to use the app on iPad and look at how this shot of the new moon was planned from a couple of weeks ago. We're going to look at a few different features within the app, but we'll also talk a little bit about the shadows and elevation adjustment feature, which we haven't covered in the previous parts. So this location is a little way north of Boulder here in Colorado. A couple of satellite dishes or radio telescopes that sit up on the edge of a mesa. There's good access from a dirt road nearby. And you can see here we have the new moon. I think it's just over a day old, positioned just to the right of the dishes. So I'll show you how to set that up and see when it might next occur. We'll switch over to the app. Here we are in Boulder. The location we're looking for is just a little way off to the north here. And if I switch to satellite view, I should be able to zoom in, and there we are. You can see there are the two dishes right in the center of the screen. And off here is North 55th Street, which provides good access. You can move up and down that road and see these dishes from different angles. So I recorded these positions earlier, so I'm going to set the red pin to where we actually took the photograph from in the end. And the first thing you probably want to look at is to understand, well, what's the line of sight across the dishes? So I'll enable Geodetics, and then I'll pick up the gray pin. That's a tap and hold, map moves, drag. Let me put it on that second dish there, and we'll see what we get. So it's showing us the altitude profile in degrees, and you can see that basically the solid white line there shows that we should be able to see up to the top of the mesa. Maybe if I switch just briefly into terrain mode, you'll get an idea for how this looks. You can see there's this area of flat ground with this ragged edge to the east side, and the dishes where the grey pin is, it sits just on the edge of that. So the terrain gets higher up towards the where the dishes are sat. Switch back to satellite and zoom in a little bit further again. And you can see that in the altitude profile. I'll double tap. There's the elevation profile. It doesn't quite all fit in this scaling, so I'll scale it. Scale to fit, showing the profile as it really is. Now what we can do here, these dishes are a certain height, and in the shadows and elevation screen, you can set object heights. Now the satellite dish that we're looking at is sat underneath the secondary pin, the grey pin, and it appears to be about, I don't have an accurate height for this, but it looks to be about 50 feet high. So if I put that in, you'll see on the right hand side of the chart the height of the dish is illustrated there with that solid line. And you can see, because it's solid, that it actually is visible. If the terrain were obscuring the building, or the object, it would be shown as a dashed line. So what we can now do is find out where the moon is going to be on that date. So let me go back to the date that I actually took the photograph on. It was February the 19th, which, as you can see, is the day after new moon from the list down there. I'm just going to turn Geodetics off briefly so you can see what's lined up here in the timeline. And you can see we have sunset at 17:41, 5:41, the end of civil twilight at 6:10, and it's telling you the best time to see the crescent moon is 6:15. Now that doesn't mean it's the only time to see the crescent moon. It's basically telling you the balance between when will the sun have set far enough and the sky darkened enough that a thin crescent moon will be at its peak visibility before it too sinks down into the horizon and sets, which you can see it does it at 6:57, a little bit later. So what's interesting, if I go back to the time of sunset and now look on the map to see the moon is actually lined up directly through the middle of those dishes. So let me put Geodetics back on. I'm just going to take the line and line it up with the moon, and we can see that on the altitude profile the moon is actually quite high up at that point. If I just drag forward, you'll see the moon descends, up, descends, and so the time when it's about to set below that mesa along that line is sometime around 10 past 6, 7 minutes past 6, right here. So, but at that point, of course, it's moved further to the north, so we can drag the pin a little bit over here. And there you can see that actually the terrain must drop away a little bit. It must be in one of those little gaps in the ragged edge of the mesa. So we have a little bit better visibility. You can see how the moon sits a little bit higher. That object height that we typed in earlier for the satellite dish, it moves with the grey pin, which obviously it doesn't in reality, but you can use that to your advantage, because you can say, well, imagine if there were an object of that height and I wanted the moon sitting more or less at the same height as the dish. That's what it tells you. So let's look a little bit here. I'm going to actually, I saved the location where the moon was, so I'm going to set the grey pin right there. That's the line that the moon was on when we took the shot, and that really corresponds to a few minutes later. It was actually 6:15, which was the best time, and it's telling us there that actually you see the moon line has gone dotted on the profile there, which means it's obscured, but it's probably obscured by the top of the structure as we've got it. Now the structure's not there, so I'm going to take that height out, and you can see there it shows the moon is visible at that point. And so that's telling you basically that we should have a lineup of 2 satellite dishes and a thin crescent moon to the right that is sitting more or less at the base of where the satellite dishes are. If I switch back to the photograph, you can see that, in fact, that's pretty much what we got. And you can see how the terrain falls away there at the right-hand side of the shot. That's why we were able to get better visibility as the moon tracked to the north when it was setting. So one interesting question is, well, when might that happen again? Can we find out the dates when we could expect to be able to recreate that shot? And the answer is yes, we can. We did that with visual search. We're looking for a moon. We're looking for a crescent moon. I'm not going to be too fussed whether it's waxing or waning, so it could be a new moon or an old moon. I don't really mind. It's already populated the target altitude and the target azimuth for that shot, and it set the date to 19th February, which is what we have in the app. So let me search over 5 years, see what we get, perform search. And indeed, see that there are a few different opportunities. So let's look at maybe Monday the 14th of September of this year. Click there. And you see that the moon is exactly on the alignment we wanted. It's basically a tiny, tiny bit further off to the north, but well within the tolerance of the search. But interestingly enough, of course, the sun is at a different position at that point. And this would be probably a tougher opportunity in terms of seeing the moon. We turn that off, because you'll see that it's only happening 6 minutes after sunset. And that's a little bit before the best time to try and see this moon. So it might be a little bit, it's going to be a brighter sky. It wouldn't have the same quality as the photograph I showed you before. So look at some other results. What about let's see if there's one different time of year. Lots in September, it seems. Well, let's look at that one. 28th of October 2016. And there we go. Again, the moon is exactly where we want it. But at this point, the sun is still well up in the sky, so it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to see that. We can tighten up the search results a little bit. I'm going to take this back to this year, February, and I'm going to say I want the moon basically during, the sun's got to be set, otherwise we're not going to see it. So let's say it's when the sun is between -2 and -10 degrees, which is oh, I know why. I've got to put them in the other way around. -10 to, so look, -2. There we go. So that's going to force it to be a couple of degrees down below the horizon and sometime into nautical twilight. Otherwise, the parameters are the same. I'll perform a search, and far fewer results. So let's have a look. 5 results. Let's look at, say, in February 2017. And we have, yes, the sun is well down. The best time to see this crescent moon is at 6:30. It's telling us 6:36 is the alignment. Now, the nice thing is, of course, don't be enslaved to these times, because in this situation you can move your shooting position up and down that road quite freely as it happens, which means you have quite a lot of flexibility in terms of achieving the alignment you want. Nonetheless, it's interesting to know what are the dates when the moon is basically going to be sat at that altitude in civil twilight or nautical twilight, when the sky is dark enough for it to be seen and it's a crescent moon. And that's essentially what we've shown here. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the shadows and elevation adjustments screen in a little bit more detail. First of all, let's look at this primary object height. Let me type in, I don't know, let's put something like 555 feet. So imagine that there were, and we know there isn't, but imagine there were a building of height 555 feet situated at the red pin. What that's going to then tell us is, on this screen where you see lunar shadow length, it means that that object, the moon, if it were bright enough, and it's obviously not when it's a new moon, but say a full moon, in darkness would cast a shadow of length 4,750 feet. If I move back a little way, and say to middle of the day, and look again, there we go. So the sun at that point is casting a shadow of 851 feet, and the moon of 598 feet. So you can type in, if you know the height of a building, you can find out the length of the shadow that it will cast at any point in the day or night, from both the sun or the moon, assuming flat terrain. So this means you can work out where would I stand in order to see the sun or the moon right at the top of that building, essentially. And you see this also on the map. So if I double tap the timeline, that locks this mode on, this shadow mode, and you see the thick line, or thick lines that are opposite the sun and the moon azimuth lines. That's showing you essentially where the shadows are cast. And if I move out here, you'll see there. Now if I scale right out, you'll see that circle. You've probably seen the circle already if you've ever scanned the timeline. If you don't put in a primary object height, then the shadow circle radius is basically just designed to fill the map. If you do put an object height in, it's designed to be where would it sit when the length of the shadow hits the end of the circle. That corresponds to the time when the object in question is at 6 degrees altitude. So you can see in this situation, 7:13 in the morning, sometime after sunrise, the sun is at 6 degrees above the horizon, and the length of the shadow cast by the object at the red pin, 555 feet high, will reach to the end of the shadow line, which is at the radius of the circle. So it's a very quick way of seeing when are you in good light and where would the end of the shadow be on flat terrain from that object. If I go change the height to something shorter, you'll see that the circle gets smaller, as you'd expect. Shorter object won't cast a shadow as far for the same sun position. And indeed there it is. But you can see that as I move, the shadow lengths lengthen and shorten, and you can zoom in. So that's the shadows to scale. If you turn this off, I'll just get rid of that altogether, then the circle is just an arbitrary height that's designed to fill the map. But you still get the benefit of seeing when are the shadows outside the circle, which means either it's good light because the sun is low in the sky, or if it's, say, a full moon, it's going to be hanging low above the horizon, and you can probably quite easily put it next to a building or a landmark or whatever you'd like to photograph it next to. So that's the first thing. I'm going to turn the shadows off. One other thing about the object height, if I switch back to satellite mode, switch Geodetics back on, if I enter, let's say, a primary object height of, let's say, 200 feet this time, you'll see that shows up here on the left-hand side of the elevation profile, representing the height of some notional structure at the red pin position. And in terms of the line of sight, it assumes that you are standing on top of that object. So that means that you can plan, what can I see from, the 20th floor of a building, for example. You can type in the height at the 20th floor, and the line of sight analysis will take that into account. Now let me just move out a bit so we'll see a little bit more elevation profile here. Let's try that. So you can see here that even if I was standing 200 feet high, I still can't see on top of the mesa. But let's bump that up to, let's say, 300 feet. And, now I'm high enough that I can see pretty much all of the top of that flat mesa. So that's the primary object height. If I put back in the secondary object height, you'll see, let's say, 100 feet. That's showing you a couple of things. One, the object height, as we'd seen previously, is indicated at the right-hand side of the profile. But you see the little dotted area of that at the bottom. What we're saying is that from standing on top of the red building at the left there, you're still not going to quite see the bottom of the building at the grey pin. These are imaginary buildings in this case. But it lets you see line of sight analysis on the building and what proportion of the building you can see as well. A couple of other things. I'm going to take the building heights out just so that it doesn't confuse things. But now I'm going to put in a primary elevation offset. So this is something you would do if you don't like the values that Google is telling you. So Google thinks that the red pin is sitting at 5,250 feet above sea level. If you have better data from, let's say, a topographic map that you trust, you can enter an adjustment in here. So for example, I'll put in a large adjustment so you can see the effect of this. So let's say we thought, and it never will be this much wrong, but imagine it was 1,000 feet higher than we were being told. I type in 1,000 feet, a couple of things happen. One, you'll see the elevation is showing in bold, showing that there's an adjustment, and it now indicates 6,250 instead of 5,250. Secondly, the elevation profile has been adjusted by that amount as well. So you see now it looks as if it's all sloping down towards the mesa, very different from how it looked before. And that's because that adjustment has been applied at the red pin position and then proportionally sort of a weighted average across the profile as we go from red to grey pin. Let's say I put in an adjustment at the grey pin as well. So let's say I think actually that is 500 feet lower than I'm being told. I'll put that in and watch what happens this time. Now it's dropped even further. That's probably not the best example. Let me make it a bit more dramatic. So I'm going to say it's 2,000 feet higher because that'll reverse things again. And there we go. See, now it thinks it's sloping all the way up to 7,500 feet. So those adjustments get applied as a weighted average across the profile. So you can put these in if you need them. It's a pretty advanced feature, but it is important in certain locations where the data from the Google Elevation Service or the Shuttle Radar Topography mission isn't quite accurate, and there are some places where that is the case. Take those off again, and you'll see that things return to normal. So there we have it. We've reviewed quite a few things today. We looked at using geodetics to explore the angle of the moon, to understand the terrain profile, the difference between the altitude and the elevation profiles, and then using visual search to find out dates when we can get a moon alignment that's equivalent to what we had on February the 19th. But then also looking at some of the more advanced features of visual search where you can specify exactly where the sun should be for that particular moon alignment, which is pretty important for a lot of moon photography. We looked at the shadow and elevation adjustments. The elevation offsets you probably won't need to use unless you're not trusting the data you're getting back or you have better information. But the primary and secondary object heights you can definitely use in situations where you need to understand, is a building visible? What can I see from the top of a building, or a combination of those two factors? So a lot of material. Hope that's been useful. Feel free to send us any questions you have by email. You can reach us at support@photoephemeris.com, and we look forward to seeing what you achieve with the app. Thank you.